Welcome, everyone, and thank you, Sequoia, for agreeing to begin. I can't even speak today. I hope you can do
Oh
better.
no. Do you want me
I
to
need you to ground me, please.
I always forget when you put the thing up saying you're going to record that you can't hear me talking. And do you want me to just start with a prayer and end with a song and prayer, or do a song?
You can do whatever you feel is best for us. Thank you.
Okay. Well, since my relative's here, I'm going to do I'll do the Coast Salish anthem and then just a really short prayer to open us, and then I'll close with something else. So open your hands, open your hearts and minds. Let's come together and Chomot Squalwin, or not so much Squalwin, one heart and one mind, and send our energy to each other. Oh, I hear someone typing. I think it's Gabrielle. And that was her response back to me. I just had to tease you. Sorry, I'm an elder. I'm getting closer to 70 than I am to 60. So I find I'm like my grandpa now, my elders. Oh, oh, Oichaka. Quen mentome kakakanak chaseyam yontio manman squalwin to squal's deceit. Asking you, Creator, to help all of your children gathered here today with our squalwin feelings in our hearts and minds. And it means so much more. My papa told me the total being, the emotional, mental, spiritual, and physical wellness and health, our inner energy. Asking you to help all of us, and asking you, Creator, to let us come together in Chomot Squalwin with one heart and one mind, to be able to share our words that we speak and listen to with Winoxis, with respect, and be able to transfer our different knowledge, experiences, and transfer of those knowledge and experiences and ask questions and be able to share our different views to be able to create a positive solution for the present and future. And asking you, Creator, let today be a Yetwan Haltzaitop, an excellent work today. Tamak Wetsi Snachum. Those are my words. And I'll turn it, just before I turn it to Holly, for those who may not know me, Sequalia Kushaman Sna, my ancestral name is Sequalia. And Wanik Queen Sna, my everyday, the name on my Indian status card in BCID is Ann Wanik. And so that's my other name, and I'm Squamish Stomach. I'm Chen. I'm a Squamish Nation elder and knowledge carrier, and I've been with Watch for a while. So it's really good to be here and to hear the updates and what's being shared today. And I have gratitude for all of you and all my family and friends, and special feelings of gratitude. I just came from SFU Burnaby Mountain, where I was the elder for the morning convocation ceremony. So there were 200 students and 6 of them were Indigenous. So it was nice. And SFU had 283 Indigenous students graduating this year. But they're not all at the convocations. I think maybe probably about 75 of them may be there over the 4 days of ceremonies. I saw some, my Squamish language nieces and nephews graduated yesterday with their Masters of Linguistics. And then today there was, like I said, 6 students getting their bachelor's degrees. And this afternoon, I think there's about 30 students getting their Masters of Business Administration degrees, Indigenous Business and Leadership from the SFU BD School. And I don't know who on Friday.
It's a really special time of year, isn't it?
Yep. So I go back Friday afternoon. Other elders doing this afternoon and tomorrow and Friday morning. And I get to be the sweep. So over to you, Holly.
Thank you, Sequoia. And I love that song. It's such a great song and you do it so well. So thank you for everything today. And I hope you can stay with us for a while. It'd be great.
You invited me and I said I would be here to open and stay for the closing, but I may be like others and shut my camera off. I have, while the videos are on in PowerPoints, I have my 19-year-old grandson home and he's not feeling well, so I have to keep checking on him.
Oh, I hope he's well soon.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. It's so nice to see this group of people. Some of my favorite people are here and that always warms my heart. Welcome everyone to the second Seasonal Reflections Workshop this calendar year and the first during our post-pilot project transition year. That's a bit of a mouthful. I have missed seeing a lot of you, and the one that I haven't missed seeing, I love seeing you again. And for those who don't know me, I'm Holly Claremont. I'm project lead for Watch, and I'm happy and grateful to live in Snuneymuxw territory, Nanoose Bay, very near an ancient village and an estuary that I'm happy to report is likely free of invasive European green crabs and has healthy populations of shore crabs and sculpins. So this is our journey today. These sessions are known to go longer than planned, so I'm going to give you a brief rundown in a segment that I'm calling What's New. And I invite you to comment or leave questions in the chat or contact me directly regarding any of the things I mentioned You could follow up later this afternoon or in the future. And the first thing I want to tell you about is kind of how the day is going to go. So after what's new, Jay and Jordan are going to give you a monitoring update, and then Jordan is going to do his fabulous looking back, looking forward session. And then we have Nicole here who's going to tell us about how to identify and record a clam garden. We have Dr. Amanda Bates. I'm so excited to hear from you about a marine diseases project, and Dr. Tim Green is here to tell us more about what's going on in his world, and then we're going to have a session with about 6-PPDQ. For those of you who don't know much about that or want to know more, that is a huge issue that's emerging, and we can't wait to tell you more about that. And then we'll do some participant updates, what we call speed rounds, so that people can have a chance to tell us about what they're doing. And then if we go over past our closing, then we'll have more time. You'll have more time with Jordan and me and whoever else wants to stay late. So the first bit of news is the federal budget included new funding, $25.1 million over 2 years starting this fiscal year to expand the Canadian Shellfish Sanitation Program, the CSSP, to assist Indigenous communities to safely access shellfish harvest. And this is big news for us. We don't necessarily know exactly what it means yet, but we know that new money is good. And Watch has been invited to apply for a United Nations Ocean Decade endorsement. This is all by invitation only. Each project lives under an Ocean Decade program, and we've been in touch with one called SmartNet. And I hope some of you have had the chance to see Lorraine McIntyre, Svetlana Senklova, and Dr. Andrew Ross present at a recent Ocean Decade Hub webinar. And for those of you who are new to this ocean celebration space, June 8th was World Oceans Day. June 1st to 9th was Ocean Week Canada, and there's still a lot on the go around the world and on the web this month to immerse yourself in all things ocean. There are a few new chapters underway for the Watch Climate and Health Risk Assessment. The value of seafoods provides a foundation for the whole assessment, and I think it's going to be amazing. Thanks to some, wow, fantastic, gracious, and so wise contributors. I don't want to spoil the surprise until we're further along, but stay tuned on that. Harmful algae and a changing climate is another important section. This will document what we've learned during the pilot project and what we still need to consider. And I'm working as quickly as I can, everyone, to amalgamate the pieces of our laboratory feasibility study now that I'm aware of 5, yes, 5 different lab initiatives, all with different approaches and partnerships and possibilities. We had a second fabulous UBC student team develop a machine learning model that used CFIA biotoxin data and climate variables to identify biotoxin hotspots for paralytic shellfish poisoning, PSP, and amnesiac shellfish poisoning, ASP, along our coast, so we can prioritize new watch monitoring and hopefully more testing in these areas. And thank you to all of the scientists who supported this work, and thanks also to those who will continue to build on it. We also wanted to briefly mention a few new things that are important to watch and that we thought you should know about. And these are in no particular order, and it's just kind of a sampling of it. So the Gemstone study aims to narrow down sanitary pollution sources, whether they're people or geese or so on. And Lorraine, Esther, Andrew, if you're out there, I hope you can tell us a little bit more about this later in the participant shares today. News from our neighbors in Washington and Oregon who are dealing with a pretty bad PSP outbreak. So far, we have no reports of hospitalizations or illness in BC, but BC CDC is planning to include marine biotoxins in their seasonal advisory this year, which to date has typically focused on Vibrio bacteria. There have been new research-based articles this past season from local to global that tell us how sensitive marine phytoplankton are and zooplankton are to environmental change and how they can foretell many climate-related issues. There's a new salmon climate impacts portal at PKIC focused on water temperature and stream flow. To get you jazzed about our diseases presentations this afternoon, this one talks about bitter crab syndrome, a parasitic disease that can wipe out crab populations and make crab taste bitter and chalky. And apparently somebody's in trouble for that. And ahead of the 6PPDQ talk, a headline, a local headline of 6PPDQ impacts and a new data portal, or maybe it's not so new, it's just new to me. In recent years, thanks to some really brilliant scientists and dedicated monitors, there's been some amazing headway, and First Nation monitors have a huge role in that. And later today, if we have time, I'd like to brainstorm a new seasonal twist on an old friend, the Leo tool. I also want to have express a warm thank you to all our supporters, past and present. And now it's time for the watch monitoring update with our highly credentialed phytoplankton specialist, Jay Pedota, and jack of all trades, environmental health scientist, Jordan Brubaker. I was feeling a little bit sentimental when I included these photos. During the pandemic, Jay was teaching monitors how to set up and use their microscopes and other equipment completely online. Huge, huge thing. And in the middle is Jordan in Prince Rupert when Hartley Bay was managing a COVID outbreak and the planes weren't flying for several days due to snow. These guys really know how to go with the flow. Just before they start, on the right are a few documents under development. On the top is a 2-page toxic shellfish bulletin that's ready for communities and to go on our webpage. And in the middle, we're standardizing alerts for the monitoring guidebook, which is a living document. And on the bottom, a guide to help watch communities to calibrate their fancy meters to accurately measure temperature, salinity, DO, pH, and chlorophyll. So now I'm going to ask Jay to join us. And Jay, please just tell me when to move things forward.
Okay. Hi, hello everyone. I'm Jay Pedota. Plankton monitoring has been like, I mean, how to say this is like, it's an important one, especially in this changing climate. Thanks to a lot of monitors who are participating in watch and also outside watch, we were able to learn few things like how they're changing with our changing climate. And I would like to point out few anecdotal impressions from like the plankton monitoring data and plankton monitoring we've been doing in the past year or two. Next slide, please. So the first thing I'd like to mention, plankton seasons, like when we were doing this, like I've been doing this for about like 14 years now. I mean about 14 years now. And the season used to be from May, like mid-May to like end of September, early October kind of a thing. But now it's been going on from almost early March to early November. That's not only the problem is some of the harmful species, they are present in the water almost throughout the year. That's the, I mean, that's the other thing, like a notable thing actually. And also, we've been seeing some plankton species, like a flageolet species was like it was thought to like only bloom in the springtime. For the first time ever, last year we saw that like bloom in very high numbers in the fall, that too in late fall, like late October and early November. It's like that kind of changes things. Like what we thought before is not same anymore, and like that requires more monitoring, more diligent monitoring for a longer time than before. Okay, and next slide, please. So this was like a very interesting thing that happened last year and the year before as well. There's a species called Heterosigma, and it's a fish killer. There's like there has been many studies on the species itself. For the first time ever, like we've been noticing last year and the year before, the size shrunk so much, and it happened all along the west coast, and it continued for like few months. Usually their size is about like 15, 20, 25 microns. That's the size range we look for. But last year and the year before, the size we observed in blooms and also in below bloom concentrations, the species were about like 10 microns in size. Some of them were even smaller. That makes the identification a lot trickier, you know? So that's another important observation. If that species changed, it's an important species. It changed like how about all the other species, how they are changing, you know? We need to monitor quite a bit more to know more about that, right? It's like the opportunities like you see a harmful plankton, like as you monitor more, you see more and more of these things. And the more you see them, if there are any morphological changes, you'll observe them, you'll record them. Like all I'm saying is we need to monitor more to see any of these changes. On the next slide, please. So this is fresh. This happened this year. Like the Carania species is very low, like incidence and very low, like kind of bloom numbers. Like the concentrations are very low usually. For the first time this year in April and May, we saw this on the West Coast in quite high numbers actually, and it was very hard to identify as well because the usual traditional way of doing sample analysis, or at least for like if you're sending in samples to somebody, is to send the samples fixed with a preservative called Oleucos iodine. In those samples we didn't see any of these Carenia species, but when we looked at a live sample, there was quite a bit of Carenia mikimota in the samples. I've been monitoring here on this coast for about like 14 years, and that's the first time I ever seen Carenia mikimota in those concentrations. And that too for a long, long period of time. It was there for almost like 3 weeks. This kind of warrants like we are aware of like a possibility to change like how we monitor. So that's very important to notice. It's like our traditional sample analysis methods may need to be changed to like to cope with like changing climate and to new species and all these anecdotal impressions, they warrant more sampling, more monitoring, like regular sampling too. If you're sampling like once a week, like for a longer time, that's really, really good. If you can sample more than once a week, if you have the capacity to do so, yeah, please like monitor as much as you can. This monitoring data helps, okay? And especially in these times where we have like higher temperatures and everything, this this is really important.
Jay, may I
That's
ask
all
a
from,
question?
yeah.
Is this Carenia species, is this the toxin that it produces, does it aerosolize like the Carenia that's like on the East Coast, like Florida, that kind of Carenia?
It can, but we never had that kind of experience here. As I mentioned, like we never had blooms of the species here on this coast, right? Like especially in these waters here. I remember from a meeting like recently, they've been observing Carenia on the Washington coast as well. So it's like it may be happening all over here. But yeah, like to come back to your questions, like it's possible, but we never had that like those levels, like those bloom levels in very high numbers to observe that.
I think you have a question. Is it that Mark that is asking a question? There you are, Mark. Okay.
I'm not Susan. I'm using my wife's computer. So you mentioned a little earlier that you were detecting a bunch of fish killers, and I'm particularly interested in finding out what species of fish are being killed by these blooms, and how are these fish ingesting them. And the reason why I'm asking is because I am starting a contract up in the Arctic. And even though the Nuvialuit are not particularly good, or they don't harvest a lot of shellfish, the species are moving north. So we're getting all salmon moving up into the Mackenzie River. They're catching chum, they're catching pinks, they're catching Chinooks up there, and so it's going to be very soon that they're going to start getting all these blooms. And so I wanted to kind of come up with a plan or a program to start monitoring phytoplankton up there. But I want to know what species of fish are being killed, and how are they ingesting them? And maybe at another date we can have an online conversation.
Sure. Yeah, there are actually about 15 species of like a fish killing phytoplankton species, and Heterosigma is one of them. And the problem with Heterosigma is it blooms pretty fast. Like it can increase in concentrations from like 200 cells, 2000, 3000 cells, like within a day or two, and it covers like vast areas. That's one of the species that's been killing fish like in here, like in BC for the longest time. And the other species that are very common up north is harmful Crassidae species, which is Crassidae concavicorni and Crassidae convolutus. They're also up there. There is like quite a bit of information on that. I can connect with you after this meeting and I can explain like all these things if if that is okay.
Yeah, that would be perfect. I'm gonna drop my new email for you in the chat, because I'm no longer with Snuneymuxw, and a lot of people have my old email. So
Yeah.
I'll just put my new email in the chat. Thanks.
Sure.
Thanks,
Okay.
Mark. Does anybody have any other questions for Jay before we ask Jordan to do his monitoring update?
Is it possible to get, I wouldn't mind, I'd be interested in getting a list of these 15 species, like the side effects and everything. Like there's like a whole new data sheet that shows all the information, what to watch out for. Is this, because a lot of our people are catching lots of springs right now, and it'd be nice to know, like there's springs and halibut that we're harvesting right now. It's a harvesting season, and it'd be good to know what to watch out for, and so I can like relay this message to the Guardians, so the Guardians can, let our people know, because sockeye is very, like, it's also sockeye season where we preserve our sockeye, and it'd be nice to know what to watch out for, like what species that are harmful and whatever.
Sure, Mary.
All right,
Alison,
thanks, Mary.
yeah.
And Jay, I'll let you contact Mary offline too as well. And if there's anything that you can share with us later on, please feel free to do that. both of you. Thank you so much, Jay, for that information. And Jordan, are you available?
Sure am, yes.
Great. Thank you.
Let's just get this going here. All right, so I'm just going to start off before we get into the kind of seasonal reflections piece. We're just going to touch a bit on the monitoring that's been going on so far, just to follow up on Jay's observations there. So this is just the Canadian Shellfish Sanitation Program, the CSSP program. Their data, we get it 4 times a year from the BC CDC, and we're just kind of tracking that along as a way of kind of corroborating or supporting the monitoring work that's going on. And so these are the shellfish. For those of you who don't know, these are shellfish that were tested in a lab for, in this case, PSP toxins, paralytic shellfish poisoning toxins. And this just goes back until January 1st of this year. And the colored dots all represent the different partner nations in the WATCH project. And we're just kind of tracking it over the season right now. And you can see that dotted line there. Anything above that level of 80 triggers a shellfish closure in whatever sub area that sample was taken from. And so you can see, you know, earlier on in the year, there's quite a few high closure kind of results in the Gitga'at territory. And then towards the end of March, starting to see it more into shot. And then Gitga'at kind of fell off. And then now we're starting to see this kind of cluster of some of the other territories starting to creep up as well as we head into the spring. So as the waters are getting warmer, some of these other areas are starting to see some increase in the PSP toxins as well. So that was the federal government's monitoring program. And then now this is with permission to share from the Stumines Nation from the WATCH project folks there. This is their phytoplankton data that they've been collecting so far in their program. I think they've been collecting now for a little bit over a year. And you can see the Dinophysis are along the top, the Pseudonychia in the middle, and then the Alexandrium on the bottom. And then they have 4 different sample locations. And you know, some nations have more, some have less. They've got 4. And the purpose of this kind of monitoring, or this chart anyway, is just to kind of to see what is the seasonality of, like, what can the data tell us just by showing the average value, the average number of these cells in their samples per month, and then just every year just kind of adding to this data and slowly building up these charts. And you can see, you know, there's some peaks, you know, in Pseudonychia. You can see it peaking here. At one site, it's peaking before the other sites, and then it tapers off into the fall. Pseudonychia is looking a little bit more erratic. And, you know, this might be partially because, you know, they've only been sampling for 1 year, but it also might just be because the Pseudonychia are always there, and they're always kind of, it's not maybe a clearly defined seasonality like maybe Dinophysis is showing. And then the Alexandrium is showing a peak as well towards the middle of the summer, you know, peaking in one site slightly before the next site. And so these are kind of high level things that might be kind of seen in this type of a data set. And then we can go down a little bit deeper now. And now, so this is the same data set we just saw, the Alexandrium on the top, the Dinophysis and the Pseudonychia. But then we also have the PSP toxins from that we just saw on my first slide from the shellfish monitoring program, and the DSP toxins. And so these are linked to the Dinophysis and the PSP with the Alexandrium. And so you can kind of see, going back from May of last year, how the phytoplankton monitoring is showing, you know, for example, the Alexandrium, they were getting some signals here. They were seeing some in the water sample at around the same time that PSP toxins were showing up in the shellfish samples. Same with the Dinophysis. You can see they were seeing them in the water actually a little bit before it started showing up in the shellfish toxin or the shellfish samples themselves. So there's this kind of idea of a lag time. And so some of this is kind of trying to get at that, what people can learn about these lag times and in these different organisms. and then we've got the different environmental parameters down here along the bottom that are collected from the folks themselves when they're out there monitoring their waters, but also we have data from the Environment Canada weather stations, and we also use some satellite data and stuff like that as well. But it's all sort of tying it together to try to get this idea as to what's, to understand these blooms of when they happen, but also when they dissipate and what these conditions might be leading to that, to try to better understand them. And this is a very upper level analysis. It's very coarse, and we do need better information about where the sample locations are for the CSSP program. We don't really know where they're taking their data, so that's obviously an important piece to link spatially with the monitoring data. But just a high level kind of analysis, and hopefully this is actually something that we're working on right now for all of the monitoring partners in the Watch project. We're building a report of this sort for everybody to be able to engage with their data and try to identify patterns with their own eyes. So that brings me into the seasonal reflections piece here. And for those of you that haven't been with us before, this is sort of where we look back at last season, maybe 2 seasons ago, at the weather and the stories that we've been seeing in the news, and then kind of weaving it together, landing at the current time, and then looking forward to the next season to see what the forecasts are showing and what we can anticipate to sort of help plan for, in this case, the summer, as we all kind of make decisions. And this was kind of following up on some of the stories we've been hearing about, this climate change. This is some of these conversations about climate change are talking about the year 2100 or some really future date. And so we're trying to more bring that conversation into the current time period where people, are living and making these decisions. So, so here was the winter, this past winter, the weather, in this case, the temperature we saw. And what we do is we calculate the anomaly, which is the difference between what actually happened, in this case, in the winter, compared to a typical winter, an average winter, which is actually from the year 1990 to 2020, that 30-year period. We compare what happened to the average of that period and see how it compared. And in this case, it was warmer. It was warmer across the whole coast, but warmer in the south than in the north. So the other way of visualizing the exact same data is this chart on the left. And now we're drilling down month by month, so we can see if there's anything we missed in the 3-month average of this picture that we can see maybe in this chart. And that red line in the middle there would be, if there was a dot on that line, that would be just a run-of-the-mill average December or January. In this case, you can see December. It was a very hot December all across the coast, especially for the south, actually. And the orange or the purple dots are the more southern weather stations. And so they were really warm. By the time January rolled around, it all pulled back in, kind of clustered around that red line, indicating it was a bit more seasonal, a bit more of a quote unquote normal kind of January. And then February again, it got a little bit warmer again. So the reason why I wanted to touch on this was that December, that really warm December, was quite significant because it melted a lot of snow that was already in the mountains, for a couple of months, and that wiped out a lot of snow. From a precipitation standpoint, this is the exact same thing, the exact same anomaly type of a calculation. The red areas being drier than typical, and the blue areas being wetter than typical. And you can see there were some areas on the map anyway. You can see the north was a bit drier, and the south actually had some wetter areas than typical. If you look at the chart on the left, you can see it's a little bit more nuanced than that. You can see that it's actually in January, there was a big split where the southern regions got a lot of rain and the northern regions actually didn't get much rain. And then in February, everybody was kind of lacking a bit of rain. December actually had a fair amount of precipitation, but unfortunately it probably all fell as rain and not as snow because of that really hot December we had. Snowfall, it was, unless you're down towards Vancouver or the Gulf Islands, which actually did see a little bit of snow, a little bit more than typical. Otherwise, it was not a whole lot of snow this winter. So after the year had wrapped up, globally speaking, it was the hottest year on record, not necessarily Canada, but as a globe. And it was actually the first year-long breach of the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit that a lot of climate scientists talk about as being a very significant level that we don't want to, leave behind us. And unfortunately, we crossed it for the entire year. So not too positive. But a really nice story though from the year from 2023 was the story about the Biggs killer whales, also known as the transient orcas killer whales. And there was actually an 8-fold increase in sightings from just 10 years ago. And so really great to see. Obviously, these are not the same as the southern resident killer whales that eat spring salmon. And these ones eat seals and sea lions, which are presumably in much better health than the salmon population. But the article didn't really specify why this was, but a really good year for those. So by the time December, or by the end of January, ski hills were closing. Seymour Mountain closed. Whistler was looking pretty rough, and this was that really warm December we had that just melted everything. And just when the ski hills probably thought it couldn't get any worse, by the end of January we had these atmospheric rivers that occurred, and that whatever snow had accumulated after the December melt, all January, by the time by the end of January rolled around, they ended up washing over Elk Falls in this case as water. So just a really poor year for snow retention in the mountains. And they noted that in the province, started raising the alarms about drought this upcoming year because of the snow issue, and BC Hydro even trimming production, anticipating they're going to have to import electricity again because of this low water drought future they're kind of anticipating this year. All the while, these fires that burned last summer in the interior actually were burning all winter long under the snow, in a term they called zombie fires. Those are now burning again. So obviously that was a scary development that it didn't get reset. I'm sure many were hoping the fires would be put out, but a lot of them stuck around. So bringing us to the spring now, it's actually kind of a good news story, I would say. You can see there's some blue, some red, and the numbers here are actually pretty small. So that's kind of what you want to see, I guess. You want to see some areas that are warmer, some are colder, but everything's kind of average. So that's positive on the coast anyway. We're talking here only. Precipitation wise, March was pretty dry, especially in the north. April was better, and May was better yet. And so you can kind of see this trend kind of moving in the right direction as we're moving into the spring and the summer. We're starting to see the rain is sort of normalizing a bit, you could say, I guess, but overall still a bit on the dry side. They discovered the most northernmost coral reef ever discovered in the Pacific Ocean, after learning from the First Nations this is halfway up the coast near Klemtu, that they already knew of this bump on the seafloor, as they called it, where the fish like to hold. They've known about that for a long time, and it wasn't until this group of scientists dove down and were able to see this thriving ecosystem 200 meters down, and I believe now they're trying to protect it. But a really interesting discovery there. These Velella, or these wind sailors, have been showing up again in Tofino. They do wash up on shores there. They're more of a tropical species, I believe. They've been washing up a bit earlier this year. Usually they wash up in the summer during an El Nino year. This year they've actually washed up in March during an El Nino year, but a little earlier than you would expect. Around that time, the herring spawn occurred as well. And there was actually some really nice bits of good news in there, seeing these spawns occurring in areas that maybe not typically seeing them in, or areas where they haven't seen them in these numbers in a while. Up in Terrace Beach in Ucluelet was a really good example this year. They had a great spawning. And then actually near this lighthouse in Victoria, it's just the second time in decades, apparently, that they've spawned there. So some great news there, at least. And this was a really interesting article that Holly shared with me. I've never heard of this organism called a siphonophore, and some snorkeler found it out by Victoria, and they're usually very, very deep in the ocean, and they're actually apparently they can get to be longer and larger than the blue whale, which I had no idea either. And so the fact that this washed up into such shallow water where someone could see it with a snorkel was quite unique. So unfortunately, the interior, Prince George area hasn't been enjoying the same amount of rain as we've been blessed with on the coast. And this is just a gentleman walking his dog in the Fraser River, where the Nechako and Fraser River come together at a time of the year when it should be full of water. And just another example here of just the snowpack that just hasn't been accumulating and hasn't been feeding this system. A couple other interesting observations. There's 2 loggerhead sea turtles found on Vancouver Island this spring. One was, I think, closer to Victoria, and the other one was up on the North Island. And one of them, had been deceased, and the other one, I believe they were able to save. But just an example of these, tropical animals showing up on our shores. There was once again some fish being stranded in a pool on the Cowichan River. Cowichan's struggled with water levels, unfortunately, for a while now. At this time of year, April, should be snowmelt helping feed the system, but they didn't have that. So luckily there were some volunteers that were able to move those fry that were stranded in the side channel back into the main stem of the river. There were some new updates from last year. We reported on this fish die-off in the Cowichan, and more information has come out about that now. They did some more digging into why that was, and the Cowichan Watershed Board co-chair and I believe former Cowichan Tribes Chief Lydia Whitsom says that it's from a wildly over-proliferation of nutrients at the outfall of Lake Cowichan sewage outfall, which actually I've learned dumps sewage, treated sewage into the Cowichan River. Other factors are water temperature, low flows, hot and dry weather, all of that combining with the nutrients to cause algae to grow. And that algae grows really quickly, and then it dies. And as it's dying, the bacteria that eat it consume all the oxygen and can cause oxygen depletion. And then there's this pH issues as well that can be caused by that. And they believe that's what caused these fish to die. I did look at the North Cowichan's website, and they said right there that during periods of very low river flow, that there's not enough flow to provide the desired amount of effluent dilution. So they're putting this effluent into the water, and they need a certain amount of water to dilute that, and they didn't get it. There were even some float homes down in where was this, Ladner, that are now kind of running dry. So the Fraser River is struggling with its water levels all the way down here on the south end as well, not just up in the interior there. It looks like it's going to be a decent sockeye season on the Somas River. Larry Johnson, the president of the Nuu-Chulnus Seafood and chairman for the Malnuth Fisheries Commission, has noticed swallows flying, as well as salmonberry bushes blooming, and noted these as indicators of a good salmon season ahead. And so I think they're anticipating a good season. So I really hope so. So when we look at where we're at right now on the drought, it hasn't really changed much over the past month, and depending where you are on the coast, you're either in a level 1 or a level 2. So right now we're sitting okay if you're on the coast. However, that doesn't tell the entire story, because the snow water index is telling us that there's actually only 30 to 40% of the typical snowpack that you would expect to be here on the coast is currently there. So we're getting some rain. The temperatures are moderate, but there's just no snow in the mountains to carry us through right now. And so because of that, drought is on the table. We're still doing much better than we were at this point in time last year, though. So there is some good news there. This is the same snow data over time. And we're actually on this black line here, and basically anywhere in this band of color is sort of the measurements that have ever been taken from snow in the past 35 years. And you can see we've been in the bottom 10th percentile of snow all year. However, just in the last few weeks, we've pulled out into this green band here, which is kind of more the normal, typical amount of snowfall. So that is actually a good sign. How long we can hang out in that green zone, we'll have to see, but it is nice to see a little bit of hope here towards the end of the snow season. Wildfires, current conditions right now, as of yesterday, are moderate in most of the coast. So obviously we got to be careful about that. The west coast of Vancouver Island is a little bit lower rating, but yeah, we're definitely going to be tracking that as well. The daily sea surface temperature, as we look at that, is across all of the months for the past 40 years for the entire globe. You can see this black line. We're still way up out of the range. All these other lines are all of the other years, and we're still way up out of the range, and still higher than the orange line, which was last year. We're still a bit warmer, but El Nino is wrapping up, and we're hoping that we can see this trend reverse. So as we look ahead to the next season, we can see now this El Nino year we just had, or I guess that was a year or two, we just had, is rolled over, and we're fast approaching the end of it, it would appear. They're expecting any day now, basically, for us to be done with the El Nino, and by the end of the summer, they're anticipating us to be a 70% chance into the La Nina, which would be great. So the River Forecast Center doesn't predict any hazards about floods related to snowmelt, but that the greatest risk for floods this season are going to be from heavy rain events, and that the low snowpack, the early snowmelt, and the lingering impacts from the ongoing drought are going to create significantly elevated drought hazards for this spring and summer. So just looking at the weather now, And this is looking out for the next 3 months, so June, July, and August. It's actually telling a very interesting story, and this might be something to do with the El Nino, which really does affect the West Coast the most. You can see that it's actually anticipating about a 50% chance that we're going to see a cooler summer than a typical summer, as compared to the rest of the country. Excuse me, that they are anticipating a much warmer year. So could be about half a degree or so cooler, 50% chance. Take that as you will. And then precipitation, it's actually showing a similar kind of story, which is on the coast here, about a 50% chance that it could be above normal precipitation. So we might be getting some rain, which would really be great to happen at a time when we don't have much snow in the mountains. So I hope that's the case. And then just one last forecast here for the sea surface temperature going out into the summer. It looks like, anywhere but within the few hundred kilometers offshore, it should be pretty seasonal. They aren't anticipating it to be warm. However, offshore, quite warm. Anywhere, closer seems to be more seasonal. And you can see this blue band down here in the Ecuador or equatorial region. That's the La Nina starting to show up. So we'll see how that pans out. But that's all I've got for today. So thanks very much for hanging in there, and I'll pass it over to you, Holly.
Thanks, Jordan. Before we get into our guest presentations, does anyone have any questions for Jordan? All right, thank you for all of that important information. And I would like to ask if Nicole Smith is available. She's an archaeologist with the Clam Garden Network, and she has agreed to tell us about an important document that the network has prepared, and I hope she gives us a little tiny taste of the ones to come. Nicole, are you available?
Yes, hi Holly, I'm right here. Yeah, thanks so much for the invitation to join you all. It is so nice to be with everyone with Watch. I've been a fan from afar, and so it's really wonderful to come and spend some time with you. My name is Nicole Smith, and I'm an archaeologist located in Husinich, Songhees, and Esquimalt territories down near the University of Victoria. And I've had the really good fortune over the last 24 years or so of working with many communities up and down the coast, and just looking at some of the names, the familiar names here. It's nice to be in this space with you, and hello to the new people I haven't met yet. Also, Sequelia, thank you so much for the beautiful opening this morning. It was wonderful way to start. Thank you. So today I'm going to share a little bit about the Clam Garden Network and some of the resources that we have available. As an archaeologist, I feel really fortunate to work with many communities to learn about some of the ways that the ancestors have lived over thousands and thousands of years. And Jordan, just reflecting on everything you shared, also thinking about the ways that the ancestors have worked with changing environments as well. And interestingly, you mentioned Fort Rod Hill and the herring spawn this year. And a number of years ago, I was fortunate to work out there. And of course, the archaeological site that's at Fort Rod Hill is just full of herring, speaking about the incredible herring spawns that have been there, and that hopefully we're starting to see more of again now. One of the sites that I feel so fortunate to work at are clam garden sites. And I first learned about clam gardens back in 2004 as finishing up as a graduate student. And I heard a presentation by the late Quaxistala Wathisla, who was presenting with geomorphologist John Harper. And they were talking about these incredible Lokiwe or walled beaches that the Kwakwaka'wakw people had cared for a long, long time. And I'm going to share a link because I don't actually have a presentation, but I'm going to share a link in the chat that hopefully many of you can bring up. And I wonder, is it okay, Holly, if I share my screen? Do you know?
Of course, absolutely.
Okay, so let me, if I do this, are you able to see the website? I'm going to just look for a little nod. Yes. Okay, wonderful. So this here is an example of a clam garden. And what you can see is the rock wall at the low tide, and this one actually goes into the mid tide a little bit. And then this flattened terrace on the landward side. And so Kwasistala and John Harper were speaking about these places. And at that moment, it was new to the scientific community, but of course the First Nations communities have always known of these places. And I was just amazed and intrigued. And since then have been really fortunate to work with many communities up and down the coast to understand more about where they're located and how we can find them, how they are different in different parts of the coast. And in about 2011, a number of us realized that we were all interested in these places and that we could learn a lot more from one another and really quickly if we work together. And so the Clam Garden Network came to be around 2011. And today it's grown to be a community that's sort of linked online and through email. We're over 300 people and always looking to grow. So if any of you are interested in learning more about clam gardens and relevant work, then please do get in touch. The website is really the best place to find us. And on it, there's all sorts of information about sort of the history of the work together. And if I click through the tabs, can you see it change on the share screen as well? Did it switch? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So there's lots of background here about clam gardens, about some of the cultural contexts, some of the science that has been happening, guided by knowledge holders within the communities. Also information about, clam gardens today and the roles that they're playing within communities, and also some of the restoration work that's happening with different communities up and down the coast. We have an education page as well. And if you scroll down, there are a number of different resources that you can access here as well. So books and videos and lesson plans and so on, because since I guess in the last 20 years, with the coming together of many different knowledge systems, we've been able to learn a lot, and many resources are being created to help communities and also the general public to understand more about these places. The network, we're still a very informal group. And we have a steering committee now. If you go to the About Us page and our team here, we have a current steering committee, Plassinian, Sky Augustine from the Staminas First Nation, Alagamith, Nicole Norris from Halalt. Hayatasu Elroy White was a long-term steering committee member who is now focused primarily in Heiltsuk territory. Marco Hatch, who is with Western Washington University and also from the Samish Nation in Washington State. Dana Lepovsky at SFU, and Solomon, ecologist from SFU, myself, Jen Silver, who is with the University of Guelph. And then Emily Spencer and Maya Gutman, who are recent graduate students from SFU as well. We're the current interim steering committee, and are working on the next phase of the Clam Garden Network, because we've been hearing from communities that there can be a role for us to help bring folks together so that we can continue to share knowledge and learn from one another. And that really has been a strength of the network over the years. And so as we sort of envision the years going forward, we're trying to imagine how we can be of best service to communities. And so anybody here, if you have ideas and suggestions, please get in touch and let us know what would be most helpful. Some of the things that we have heard are that resources are really, really helpful. And so if you go to the education tab again, you can see that there are a couple of documents at the top. And one is about how to identify and record a clam garden. So we hear from a lot of communities who are often interested in just confirming whether or not what they found in their territory is a clam garden. And so this guide, if you click on the link, does it come up? Do I get a PDF? I don't know if it's still coming up. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Holly. I can see you in my window, so I'm happy to get your nod. So this is a document that we created a couple of years ago, which is intended to be for First Nations communities and Native American tribes who are out and on the water and stewarding the shorelines. And through this guide, you can see a whole series table of contents here. Who is the guide for? What is a clam garden? I mean, of course, clam garden is the English word, but there are often terms in the local languages for these places. And then some other sort of background information. And then moving into what does a clam garden look like, where to look for them, how to find them. Some guiding questions to help if you have found a clam garden, and then if you have maybe some ideas about how you might want to record them. What are some key characteristics that are important to record, and other things to consider? So if we just scroll through the document, I'll just give you a quick overview because I know we have lots of really interesting presentations to come. I think, the most important thing, of course, is that in doing the surveys, it's really important to time them with the lowest tides of the year, with those zero tides, because so often that rock wall will be right at the very, very low tide. And so to be able to see their full extent, those lowest tides are absolutely key. So here is an example up on the Central Coast. You can see that rock wall and the flattened terrace behind. And if we scroll down a little further, there are some more examples of what some of them look like. And what we're learning, and learning from communities who are out and on beaches, is that they'll often look different depending on where you are on the coast. So for example, here down in the Southern Gulf Islands and Southern Vancouver Island, often the rock wall is not as obvious as it might be in other places. And here you can you see my cursor if I'm holding it over the screen too? Yeah. So this is an example of a clam garden or a sea garden in the Southern Gulf Islands, and that rock wall is really quite subtle. And one of the reasons for that is that in this part of the coast, sea levels have been rising for the last 11,000 years. And so what often we see today is just the very top part of the wall at the low tide mark. And the rest of the wall is actually completely underwater now. all of the time. That's quite different than other places like up on Quadra Island, that first picture that we saw on the Clam Garden website, where the wall comes a little bit into the intertidal. In this part of the coast, sea levels have actually been falling for the last 14,000 years. And so that means that some of the really old walls will now be a little bit higher in the intertidal and a bit easier to see. So depending on where you are on the coast, there'll be different environmental reasons like sea level, but also different cultural reasons for the different shapes and so on. So anyway, lots of things to look out for. And these are just a few examples of some that we see. Down in the left-hand corner here, sometimes we'll even see multi-terraced features. And so you might have a wall right at low tide, like that one you can see at the low water mark, and then another one higher in the intertidal. So this guide will give a few examples and ideas of things to look for. Also where to look. We find that they tend to like areas with a lot of current and a lot of flow, not necessarily right at the heads of bays, but where you have more current, often between bedrock. And sometimes we even find them built right on bedrock shelves themselves, where the ancestors have created new clam habitat where there wasn't any before. So this guide, it'll give you some helpful tips of what to look for. Sometimes, you know, those green areas on marine charts, the shallower areas, those often can be clam gardens. Interesting. That's a helpful tip. And then also, you know, some of the common questions like, have you found a clam garden or not? And some sort of yes or no questions to go through. And then when you do have one, some interesting features that are useful to consider. And then there's a recording sheet at the end of the guide as well. And it also asks you some things about beach condition. So signs the beach might be healthy, signs the beach might be a bit more unhealthy, and so on. And so after producing this guide, and then also hosting during COVID, we hosted an online conversation series where communities from up and down the coast came together just to share some of their observations and some of their projects and so on. We learned and heard that many communities had a lot of questions about restoring clam gardens or sea gardens in their territory. And so we're just in the final design stages of releasing our next guide. And many of the people on this call here have been a part of this document. It's a follow-up document, which is a pathway for communities to think about who may be wanting to restore a clam garden or sea garden in their territory. And the authors of this document, it's really been guided by the knowledge holders in those communities that have been involved in restoration so far. So the Hul'qumi'num and Husainich nations with Parks Canada, of course, have been involved in the Sea Garden Restoration Project in the Southern Gulf Islands. Many of the people involved in that project have contributed to this document, and same with many people from the Swinomish tribe in Washington State. There, the community has been building the first modern day clam garden. And so we have members from both of these places who are sharing many of their experiences. And this document is a way for new communities who are now thinking about engaging on a project, some of the things they may want to consider just based on the other experiences in these communities. So if anyone is interested in getting a copy of that when it comes out, we're really hopeful it'll be within the next month, then please do send me a note in the chat. I can get you on our email list, or feel free to use the contact button on the website. So thank you.
Thank you,
Stop
Nicole.
sharing.
It's we are hearing about a lot of new clown garden, seed garden projects all the time, and of course, our role is to usually lend Jay to the communities to be able to have a better understanding of the harmful algae situation that they might be facing, and what to how to address those things. So always keep us in mind as well. And we all like to support these projects and this great work going forward. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And we look forward to seeing the new one. It's I've seen little bits of it. It looks really good. So thank you so much, Nicole. And does anybody have any questions for Nicole? All right, you're off the hook.
I had a question, Nicole.
Oh, sorry,
I'm
Amanda.
curious about, like, so the network looks like really amazing, and I'm wondering how long it took just to kind of come up with the idea for the network and then build what your team has built.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, it really just evolved out of a lot of people being really interested and passionate in these places. And we realized early on that bringing many knowledge systems together was so important, because we all had different bits to contribute, really. And so it just started with meetings where we were coming together and sharing, and then project ideas developed, and we're like, yes, we can help with that. We can help with that. And so it became this collaborative effort that just has gained momentum. And we've kind of moved with it as it has needed to. During COVID, just before COVID, we realized that it was time to have a big gathering and bring people together. And then COVID hit. And so we thought, oh my goodness, where do we go now? And we ended up having this online conversation series that spanned 8 months. And in the end, that was so much better, because we were able to connect with communities up and down the coast. And so we had people from Alaska, throughout BC, into Washington, down to California, some people further away. And so that was really exciting, because it allowed us to sort of create community in a way that we might not have with a one-off event. Having said that, we can't wait to bring everyone together in person again at some point. So that doesn't really, I don't know, I guess I'd be happy to share more, Amanda, at some point about sort of the genesis of it all. And you'll get a little sense from the website as well, reading. But yeah, it has been a very special group. Mm-hmm.
Great. So Mark's on my screen, so I'll ask you, Mark, for your question, then Hank.
Nicole, thank you. That was a really interesting presentation, and I'm definitely going to go and look up your website. My question is, do you see clam gardens playing a role in adapting and mitigating the climate change? And if you have sort of considered that, how exactly are you doing that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wonderful question. And it's something that we often think about, because what is really exciting, I think, about working in these spaces is that you can see that these are places that communities, that the ancestors have been caring for a long time, and amidst change. So for example, the rising sea level or falling sea level, we see that it's a flexible technology where you can adjust the wall as you need to with the changing circumstances. And certainly it's not like building a static wall and leaving it, as we may always think about within our sort of Western framework. It's a place that you build and you revisit and you care for every time you're out there in the way you would care often for a family member. And so because you're out there constantly, you're able to adjust. And so we see that these walls where sea level has been rising, they've been built up with time. Where sea level has been falling, we see that they've been moving and changing with those sea levels. Now, as for some of the other big changes, I mean, we're facing changes today that are happening really quickly and that are new. So how will they adapt? We're excited to see. But we do see evidence that clam gardens can keep shellfish cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. So that's encouraging. We also know that they're places that are not just about clams, they're about many different species as well. And so there's a lot to think about there in terms of the interactions between species. There's some of the traditional practices as well. There are strategies in there that we may want to be thinking about more. So the terraces themselves, they're full of shell hash. And traditionally, elders will talk about how after digging your clams, sometimes you can break up the clamshell and put it back in the beaches. And that is more calcium carbonate. That helps with the juvenile clams for building their shells. And so something that we're curious about is there a way to buffer ocean acidification, for example, with the added calcium carbonate going back into beaches? So your question is one that we're wondering about as well. We can see that they have done well, and can we continue to sort of work in the same efforts to make them useful going forward with the challenges?
Thank you, Nicole.
You're
Thanks for the great question, Mark. And one of the things that we are there, we have some folks, I'm not sure if any of them are in the room right now, but that are doing work around the cysts, the harmful algae. Some of them, like Alexandrium, form cysts, and they are in the sediments, and the working of the clam gardens actually brings us to the surface, and they just wash away with the tide, so that these areas sometimes can be less susceptible to the formation of blooms too. So that is another thing that some folks are looking into right now, and it really makes sense. So thanks, Nicole, for that, and Mark. And Hank, you have a question.
There we go. Hi, can you guys hear me okay? Hi, Nicole. It's been a while.
Hi, Hank. It's great to see you.
I don't have a question. So I've been a part of the Sishop Beekeeper team since 2013, and my office is located here at Sishop First Nation, but I've been placed in the archives. And when I see Nicole pop up, I look to my left, and I just carefully grabbed this. And this is from 2008, when I first met Nicole from the Hequist Dice Box project. I don't know if you can see that clearly.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Can you guys see that properly? It might be blurry. This is a wolf comb that was discovered by Nicole and some of her students in 2008. It's made
That's
out of
awesome.
it's beautifully carved on both sides. I don't know how I can do that. It's kind of,
Is it out of bone or?
yeah, it's made out of bone. I think it's deer bone, I believe, right, Nicole?
Ooh.
Yeah, I think or deer or elk. Yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted to carefully share this, and it was nice to see you again. Thank you for your presentation and everybody's time and efforts that were put into today. I've been listening, and thank you for your words, and look forward to hearing more from everyone over the summer. Take care.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Hank.
Yes.
That's really special. And Mark, did you want to say something else?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up because Nicole mentioned ocean acidification. And it's one of those areas that I've been particularly interested in since I worked up north with the Kitsim-Kalem. And the idea was to do a little bit of enhanced evolution, I guess, and try and reproduce clams and cockles to be more resistant to that ocean acidification, because it's the lower pHs that kind of, they basically kill all the little critters when they're transforming from being planktonic to going down into benthic. They can't form that shell. And Vic, VIU and Tim have been working on stuff, and I was talking to Tim, and I think he mentioned that he was on here. I haven't seen him, but they have I guess a strain of oysters that are resistant to ocean acidification, and it would be very interesting for the nations to consider this and talk to Tim and see if they can't get a whole bunch of clams and cockles and oysters and whatever shellfish are important to you, and work that's the perfect blend of that two-eyed seeing, right? Traditional knowledge with Western science to see how we can create that acid resistant strains of clams and cockles so that they start surviving and we start getting more robust recruitments on our beaches.
So Tim, if you're out there, did you want to speak to that, or do you want to wait until your presentation?
I think I'll wait to my presentation. I think
Okay.
that nicely ties in, Mark, to
Okay,
some of
super.
the things that I was hoping to bring up. So yeah, and thank you, Nicole. That was a fantastic presentation. I really enjoyed that website, and I regularly use it during teaching. So yeah, it's a really fascinating and excellent resource. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. I can't wait to hear your talk, Tim, too. And I've heard so much about your work, and so I'm excited. So I will be quiet so that we can hear from you and Amanda, and then our other speaker too. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nicole. All right, Dr. Amanda Bates, professor in ocean conservation at UVic, and we are so happy to see you, Amanda.
All right, can you see my screen? If I go to presenter view. Is this
Looks good.
visible? Okay, so first of all, I just want to say thank you so much, Holly, for welcoming me to WATCH. I didn't know what to expect because I haven't been a part of the WATCH community, but I've just been riveted to my screen. So thank you so much. It's been really nice. And Jordan, I really appreciated the seasonal reflections where you had like a very pragmatic approach, kind of also mixed with some positive messages. I personally think that's nice balance and appreciated that. So I'd like to just start by introducing myself. My name's Amanda. I'm a professor at UVic, but I have just recently come to UVic. Before that, I was actually in many parts of the world trying to get home to Vancouver Island. And I call Vancouver Island home, but I actually grew up on the lands of the Stolo Nation in a place called Chilliwack that I grew up knowing as Chilliwack. And it was agricultural community, very much settler based. So I grew up with sheep and pie, shoveling poop out of stalls, playing in hay bales and, that kind of thing. And when I first came to Vancouver Island, it just blew my mind. I completely fell in love with it. And I brought this beautiful chunk of stained glass around like the whole world with me for over 12 years, broke it many times and repaired it many times because Bamfield on the Nuu-chah-nulth Nation or the Huhayat First Nation territory, like just was so impactful to me as a student in my youth and changed my whole trajectory. I decided to be a marine biologist when I saw these beautiful beaches and these massive trees and this forest that was, you know, dripping with fog and amazing productivity. It was just so inspiring. So, and I guess what I've been reflecting on when I've been hearing some, you know, of Nicole's presentation as well as Jordan's, is that, you know, place is so key. It's so inspiring to us, and it is so heartwarming. So I guess I just want to take a step back and say, like, I've only been back at UVic as a professor for 2 years, and now I'm sitting and thinking, how should I work with my research group to best serve community? How can I work in terms of the research that, you know, we address that's going to be most useful? And so what happened to me in 2008 before I left Canada is I was doing a postdoc out in Banfield, and I was working with sea stars, and they just started turning to mush. And like, that was very impactful because I realized how important marine diseases are, how little we actually knew or know about many of them. And I also realized at this time, you know, how different this disease transmission is in the ocean when, you know, things are wet and they're not getting exposed to air and they're not dying, and how quickly and rapidly diseases can spread. So I went off after 2008 and 2009. I was gone until just recently. And of course, have always had this interest in disease, but has also seen a really different environment now than even a decade ago. So, you know, 10 years ago, there was kelp forests all over the sites where I used to work. Now I'm only seeing, like, they're recovering, but I'm only seeing smaller Pisaster. But of course, I remember when they were much bigger. And then many of the other echinoderms have suffered. And if you look, you know, in the scientific literature, there's this real connection between climate change and diseases, especially in the wild. And so I've actually, in the background, Holly, I started cutting out a whole bunch of slides. So I've cut about 10 out of this presentation, and I'm just going to be really quick because I know we're all super excited to hear from Tim. But I just wanted to take a little step back and think about, well, the disease, what is it? And so we've already heard about a number of diseases. They can, of course, be from a number of different agents like viruses, bacteria. We could have protozoa. We can also have parasites, so animals that are affecting other animals and kind of using energy and resources. But a lot of times when we think about disease, we think about a pathogen, like something that's going to kill the host. And when we think about studying diseases, you can have, you know, a typical biologist, scientist with a white, you know, coat, and they've got their glasses on and they're looking through the microscope or something like you'd see in a movie. And, you know, that's really characterizing that disease, like what it is, what kind of agent is it, where is it found in the host tissues? You'd be using kind of microscope or, you know, molecular tools. But you could also think about, you know, well, wow, I'm actually interested in the host. Like, what makes a host really vulnerable? Where are the resilient populations? How we can build resilience in nature? And then also the environment. You know, we need monitoring, which I've heard many times. You know, we need monitoring data to kind of understand what might be interacting with those disease agents, why things might be spreading, how might they be changing through time. And when you think about the team of people that come together to study disease, it's actually a huge number of experts, from people that are experts on the land and water, who actually got eyes and are looking and seeing what's there. And then other experts that might be identifying and characterizing a disease and, you know, are based in a lab and, you know, using, you know, various tools to do that IDing. And then maybe modelers. We might need some mathematicians to come in and do some epidemiological modeling in math and try and figure out, like, how we might predict where things are going. And then also trying to understand the environment and the oceanography, and thinking about all of the different types of information and knowledge we could bring into understanding, you know, what kind of diseases are emerging and what's important in our environment to us, in our communities. And when we think about all of the different components, this is a little schematic, and I've put 2 links to papers if anyone's interested in having a look where this little schematic comes from. It's a lot more detail in the manuscript, and I've clipped out this little bit. But if we think about the environment and climate change, of course, climate change is, you know, influencing temperature, which we've mentioned, but also salinity, We also have a lot more activity on the water. There's a lot more people. And so we're moving around, and that can also influence, you know, diseases and how they spread. But also climate can influence how virulent diseases are, where we find diseases. We can have diseases that are shifting and moving. And then also even their growth rate, how quickly they're reproducing and infecting other hosts. And then there's all sorts of factors about the host that are important too, like how dense the hosts are. You know, there's all sorts of, you know, aspects that interact with the environment, which might make a host more or less vulnerable, and then also influence immune response. So it actually takes a lot of knowledge to be able to accurately predict how different diseases might respond under different scenarios. But in general, what we're seeing, and I'm actually doing a huge review across all of North America right now on climate change and biodiversity effects. And one of the strongest and best evidence of climate change biodiversity effects that we're seeing across Mexico, the US, and Canada is disease and disease impacts and spread. And probably because we're monitoring for it. In a lot of cases, this is coming from land to terrestrial systems. So I started to look because Holly said, well, can you tell us a little bit about disease? And I was like, I know about one disease on the ground. So I started to dig, and I was absolutely like overwhelmed, of course, by how much and how interesting disease is on Vancouver Island historically, and then also kind of now. And a lot of some of the first things that you can search up are on salmon and salmon aquaculture. And I'm sure I don't need to tell anyone here about some of the controversy and challenges there's been around farm salmon and natural salmon and exchange of disease across our farmed and our wild salmon. But I also found this one paper that looked at a whole bunch of different salmon in the wild and found 59 infectious agents and actually mapped the distribution of all of these agents. So when you looked kind of using molecular tools and tags, there's just tons of infectious agents out there in our wild. And then Tim is a colleague of mine. He's going to talk next, hopefully. And of course, in our shellfish and oyster sector, there's a huge list of diseases, and DFO has a great, lots of information on different diseases in marine organisms as well, both animals that are farmed as well as in the wild, and huge lists, especially for oysters. So we know about a lot of diseases, you know, where we're farming or where there's, you know, we're eating things because, of course, we're concerned about disease. And you can go on to DFO and have a, you know, look at all of these lists. And I guess what I'm hoping to do with my research team is also start to collate and join in some information on other diseases that we're finding, you know, with wildlife diseases. So I'll talk about that in a sec. And of course, after 2008, there was a mass die-off, not only of this Pies, or this keystone intertidal sea star that we probably, I hope everyone here knows and loves because it's beautiful, but also the sunflower star. And the sunflower star was one of the first, it is the first invertebrate species to be red listed. So it's considered an endangered species. There's been billions of Pycnopodia that we think have died off. And one of my interests in my group is looking at the recovery of Pycnopodia. So we're trying to track the recovery of species, for instance, in Barkley Sound. But hundreds, billions of sea stars, huge amount. So this is really incredible. And I guess while this is a wildlife disease, one of the important things is that, you know, wildlife diseases for these animals that are so important and play such important roles in the ecosystem can have huge, you know, impacts to our nearshore fisheries and other systems that, you know, we're using for either cultural or our livelihoods are really important to us. And that's one of the take homes is when we lost all of the Pisa or all of the Pycnopodia, one of the take homes is that, you know, the role that this animal was playing, this giant sunflower star, which is one of the biggest in the whole world, was playing in the system was really revealed to us. So this sea star is, you know, feeding on urchins, and those urchins are, you know, eating kelp. And so removing kelp from the system. And of course, kelp supports, you know, fisheries and just whole ecosystems, super important. And then, you know, another disease that, so now I've opened up my lab. So the students coming into my lab now have the opportunity to work on a disease. And I have the first one, Madeline Abbott, and she will be working on Cylon infections in shrimp, which is in this little figure called 3. And I didn't even know this infection existed. She happens to be so fascinated about a parasitic barnacle that essentially grows these little roots into the main body cavity of prawns and actually other shrimp species, and then hijacks that animal, uses all of its energy, and produces lots and lots of little, you know, larvae that are then, you know, going out into the water column infecting more. And there are some stocks that have really, really high prevalence of this disease, and this is a, you know, a concern to anyone who's like harvesting these guys. Okay, and last slide before I'll jump into what I'd love to do is, you know, there's also diseases that are important, you know, to our marine mammals and our seabirds. And there's been mass die-offs, for instance, of birds. We think it's due to avian flu, and this has huge potential to interact with humans. And I guess in talking to colleagues, so I've talked with Alyssa Gieman from HiCi, Dr. Green, who you'll hear from next from VIU, as well as colleagues from DFO. And what we're finding is that, wow, like we do feel there's a real lack of capacity to study marine wildlife diseases. And so hands down, everyone has been cheering, like, Amanda, like, do this, get a network together, let's start working on this, because we feel that there's a real gap in knowledge, but this is a really important area. So I reached out to Holly and asked if I could come and chat about an idea to put a network together, and Holly was so positive. Thank you, Holly. And I guess what I'd love to do is, Nicole, I'd love to do like what we've done or what you've done. So I was looking at your talk, it was like, wow, that's exactly what we're thinking could be really useful, is to bring a network together where we connect with, you know, people that are already out monitoring or on the water, or, you know, have that expert knowledge. Do we want to work with networks that are already successful and underway, like the Leo network, which I've worked with previously when I was looking at extreme kind of reports during COVID, during the outbreaks, and looking for unusual reports because of the pandemic. But, you know, do we want to use networks that are underway? Is there monitoring that we can start working with to kind of get an understanding of, you know, how important are disease outbreaks in the wild? What, if we're starting to train, you know, scientists coming in to study these, what kind of diseases should we be getting them to focus on? And I guess why I asked you, Nicole, like how much time is, I think we're at stage 1 for this. So I was going to say, okay, we're at, Holly said yes, that I could come and talk. So I guess we're at the very beginning, and Tim was cheering, so he's here too. So we're at stage 1 for this, and I'd love to just have anyone reach out to me. I've put my email in the bottom of the slide with any ideas or chat about, you know, moving this network forward. We might try and start to get some funding to bring in, you know, a network. My student coming in we're going to think about reaching out and try to get some meetings together to kind of start building a network and thinking about what would be important to community. Okay, so I think I'll stop there and love any questions or thoughts if
Thanks,
have.
Amanda. That is great. There's a couple of questions. I'm glad my lunch was a while ago, but it's exactly what we need to be thinking about, and you know, when people are sharing observations and going, what's this? What's going on here? You know, to have that group of experts around to be able to respond to some of those things is really important and valuable. And I'm going to open the floor for Amanda for questions, and we're also going to bring in Angeline has to leave for 3, so we're going to invite her to speak before Tim has graciously agreed to wait. As everyone knows, this always goes longer than we ever anticipate. So Mark, I'm going to ask you if you can make it quick, but or potentially yeah, just to make sure that we have enough time to hear about PPDQ from Angeline before 3. Thanks.
So Amanda, yes, I agree that getting a network going is a fantastic idea. I am going to reach out to you and offer my help in whichever way it can be done. Because when I worked up in Kitsim-Kalem, I used to have elders walking into my office and putting diseased fish on my desk and asking me what the hell was going on, that they'd never seen these things.
Mm.
And there was one that was so deformed that I actually cut it open on my desk, and I found that the kidneys were completely inflamed. I sent the sample down to DFO and they lost it.
Yeah.
So I never got an answer. So what you're doing is really important, and yeah, count me in.
Oh, thanks for doing work. But you know what? That's exactly what would be useful, I think, is if we could know, like, what do we do when we find these kind of, you know, samples, and we want to be able to see anything that's going to potentially be harmful really quickly and then be able to respond to it in a smart way, I think.
Well, developing a protocol for shipment and preservation is
Yeah.
key.
Yeah.
Something that people can do quickly.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. Anyone else for Amanda? I'm so sorry to cut you off here, Amanda. I know everybody would love to probably talk to you for a long time. So if you can stick around for a little longer, like after 3, we would definitely love to have you. If you can't, we totally understand. And I'm going to invite Dr. Angeline Tillmans, aquatic ecologist and head of water quality guidelines for the BC Ministry of Water, Lands and Resource Stewardship, who many of us have come to call Walrus.
Thanks, Holly. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Tim, for stepping aside, letting me go. I'm sorry, I have to pick up my daughter at 3, so I do have to run. It's always this tight deadline. I'm here on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Esquimalt and the Songhees. And these days, the wild roses are still blooming, which is lovely. It's been a longer season for those than usual because of the damp weather. So I'll share my screen. And I do have kind of a traditional or scientific presentation here, which is maybe unusual for this, sorry, I'm talking and doing this at the same time, for this group, but it's kind of used to how I'm used to presenting this information. So hopefully you can all see my screen. Yes, yeah, awesome. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 6-PPD quinone, but I'll also give you a bit of an overview of water quality guidelines. I'll talk about the sources and transport of 6-PPD quinone, the toxicity. I'll introduce the guidelines and talk briefly about some mitigation, things we can do to mitigate the effects of 6-PPD quinone. So water quality guidelines are developed by the province. So they're benchmarks. They can be physical, chemical, or biological characteristics. And they're in place to help people interpret monitoring results, really, to understand if there's a risk posed by contaminants in the water column. They aren't themselves legally binding, but they can be used as part of permits and authorizations, in which case they do become legally binding. And the level of protection is set by policy. So different jurisdictions will have different level of protections for the guidelines. So not all guidelines or water criteria are the same, water quality criteria. It depends on the jurisdiction that developed them. And so in BC, we have pretty high level of protection. So our chronic water quality guidelines, they're derived to protect all forms of aquatic life and all stages of their life cycle to be protected indefinitely. So when we issue a chronic water quality guideline, we are anticipating that that level will be very low risk to aquatic life. And if you're not familiar with deriving guidelines from toxicity information, I'll just quickly lead you through it. So imagine we have a substance, say copper. People are releasing copper to the water, but they don't know how much is too much, how much might cause a risk. So we have a question. So what usually happens next is we conduct toxicity tests. So unfortunately, we sacrifice animals, fish larvae, and aquatic invertebrates. We expose them to different concentrations of copper to come up with a concentration that would cause mortality. So here we have what's called a lethal concentration of 50% of the population, and that gives us the concentration that we would use in an acute guideline. The acute guidelines are a bit different. They're not chronic. They're for spills, and or like really quick releases of a contaminant, and they're to protect against lethality. Just an aside there. So once we've done that for a number of species, then we add an assessment factor that we'd extrapolate back so that we can have a predicted no effect concentration that would protect an ecosystem. So that's the process of creating water quality guidelines. So 6-ppd-quinone, I'm not going to try to say this, but here it is written out if you want to see what it looks like. We just call it 6-ppd-quinone for short, or 6-ppdq. So it is derived from a parent molecule. So this is the parent molecule here. And it was developed in the 1960s to prevent cracking and degradation in rubber, mostly in car tires. And so this molecule is it's 1 to 2% by weight of a car tire. And as the little particles in the tire wear off on the road, those new parts of the rubber are exposed to the ozone, ground level ozone, which then oxidize into 6-ppd-quinone. And then again, those particles are weared off onto the road. And so you have all this buildup of tire dust, which then eventually gets washed into the streams. So it was first identified in 2020 by a team of chemists at the University of Washington. And it's quite an interesting story. So in Puget Sound, they've been doing a lot of urban stream restoration and a lot of work restoring habitat, restoring gravel beds. And they found that, yes, the salmon were coming back, which was wonderful. But then in the fall, with the first rains, they noticed, the coho were at the top of the streams. They were gasping for what looked like air, and they were dead within 24 hours. And so the chemists did a lot of work to try to understand what's causing this mortality of the salmon, and they took samples from the runoff right away from the road after the first rains, and they kept isolating the constituents. So they figured out, okay, it's related to tire wear particles, but there's also a whole bunch of chemicals related to tire wear particles. So it's not a metal, so it's an organic. And so they kept going through this sieving, and they finally came up with the molecular structure of the compound, but they still didn't know what it was. And it wasn't until they were reading through industry reports written in like the 1970s that they came across a compound that matched the chemical structure or the chemical formula and was put into tire products. So they synthesized that, and sure enough, it's quite toxic to salmon. So I already mentioned it's in tires. It's about 1 to 2% of tires by weight. And the tire wear particles accumulate on roadways, and then they're washed into streams. So this is a graph that's taken from a river in Ontario. On this y-axis, you have the concentration of 6-ppd-quinone. On the right axis, you have the discharge of the water in meter cubed per second. And this is the hour since the rain event on the x-axis here. So you can see you get a big rain event, the discharge goes way up and it tapers off. And shortly after, 6-ppd-quinone rises and then it falls. And some of the data we have from Vancouver Island that hasn't been published yet, though, that I saw in a recent workshop, actually shows that this curve spikes a lot quicker than what we see here in this Ontario example. One of the chemical properties of 6-ppd-quinone is called the octagonal water partitioning coefficient, and it explains how much of that chemical, if if it's in the water, how much of that chemical wants to get into the lipid or into the fat of an organism. And in this case, the number 3.24 suggests that it could accumulate in tissue of organisms. So we don't have any data yet to show that it has. That will also depend on whether or not the organism, the fish or the invertebrate, can metabolize it. And the half-life of 6-ppdquinone in the water is about 13 days, which suggests it's not persistent. It's not like PFAS or PCBs. But because it's on tire wear particles and because there's millions of cars and they're driving over streams all the time, it's going to be what we say is pseudo-persistent. And then every time there's a rain event, it's likely to get washed into streams. So people have started to do toxicity tests on fish. And here are some of the results that have come out recently. And what I really want to show or raise your awareness to is the large range. So for coho salmon, we have 0.041 of a microgram. And that's so little. And I have over here a little note. I mean, if you took a microgram is about equal to a parts per billion. And so if you took a half a teaspoon of salt, for example, and you put it in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, that would be 1 parts per billion of salt. But we're talking about 1/100th of 1/2 a teaspoon dissolved in an Olympic swimming pool is toxic to coho salmon. So it's a crazy low number. Like there's not a lot of substances that are that toxic. And for whatever reason, it appears that coho salmon is more sensitive by an order of magnitude than by, for example, white spotted char or brook trout or rainbow trout. And then some species like Chinook salmon, though, I mean, normally we would say this still is toxic, but it's not nearly as toxic as it is to coho salmon. So it's very specifically toxic to coho salmon for some reason that we don't know yet. And some species like white sturgeon, they after 96 hours of exposing them to 12.7 micrograms per liter, there was no effect. So some species don't seem to be sensitive at all. So when we draft a water quality guideline, we take all the data we can and we plot it. So these are all the scientific names. And then this is coho salmon right here. And then the different endpoints, we have LC50s is the circle and NOACs is the triangles, and fish and invertebrate. And the most sensitive endpoint here was for coho salmon, 0.041 micrograms per liter. So this is a lethal concentration that is expected to kill 50% of the population. So clearly, if we want to protect against lethality, we can't choose that. So we added an assessment factor, which will take us down to 0.01 micrograms per liter. And the LC10 value was 0.02. So we know this was predicted to protect against lethality for coho salmon. We also, as part of this guideline, we collated all the background ambient concentrations we could from across Canada and also from Washington. So you have the concentration of 6-ppdquinone on the y-axis and the different jurisdictions on the x-axis. The different types of samples are color-coded. If we could measure the concentration, it's filled in, it's detected. If we couldn't measure it, it's non-detect. So we just know it's below our detection. And I've put in here the orange line, which is our predicted, our draft acute water quality guideline for BC. And you can see in British Columbia, most of the samples, actually in all the jurisdictions, but if we're just focused on BC, about 80% of the samples are above the water quality guideline. So as soon as we issue this, I'm really hoping people will start getting busy because the mitigation for 6-ppdquinone is the same thing we've been talking about for at least 2 decades, maybe longer. It is green infrastructure, it's bioswales, it's rain gardens, it's bioretention cells. It's making sure that that water running off the road isn't going right into a creek. It's going into some other organic system where those contaminants are going to bind to the organic matter. before they reach the water. And Vancouver, the Metro Vancouver, together with UBC, they did a study on the on bioretention cells, and they did a spike test, and they found that it did bind up about 98% of the 6-ppdquinone, and if you look at it over a year, it retained greater than 99% of the 6-ppdq. So we do have the technology to mitigate it. The tire manufacturers are talking about substituting a different chemical in the tire, which I'm always a bit hesitant because so many times we get another chemical that's also has repercussions that we didn't expect. So I have to run, so I'll just stop there. But one of the reasons Holly asked me to come, and thank you, Holly, is because we do have a draft water quality guideline, a draft acute water quality guideline. And part of our review process is we review it internally, and internally means internally to government organizations. So the province, the municipalities, the federal government, and First Nations. So if any First Nations community would like to review this, you're more than welcome. You can send me an email, and I would be happy to share with you. Okay, thanks all for your attention.
That's great, Angeline. Thank you so much, and drive safe. And hopefully your daughter will be happy and waiting for you when you come. I wanted to touch base with so I'll let you go, and anybody who wants to, anybody who has questions for Angeline, just please send them to me or put them in the chat or send them directly to her. We'll make sure she gets your questions and that they get responded to. So appreciate that very much. Sequilla, are you there?
Yes, I was just checking, see who's all here yet.
So Sequilla, we have one more presentation to go.
Oh, I can stay for it and
Can
then
you?
do
Okay.
the closing.
Super, thank you so much.
Because I'm enjoying listening to all this. And
Excellent.
it's interesting because I worry about all this, and sometimes, if you all don't mind, share when I'm in my rights and title, rights and territory meeting and talking about fisheries or something, and share what I hear here, because I'm like, oh my goodness.
There's a lot to
So
learn.
I'll say, yeah.
Thank you so much for that, and I hope I'm not seeming too pushy today. I don't want to be doing that. I want to make sure that everybody has the time and space to say what they need to say, and so please, if you can afford to stay, I hope you do. And Tim, everybody's been just waiting patiently for your insights and knowledge, and I would like to invite you to speak to us. Thank you. Are you muted?
Sorry about that, everyone.
Yep, can hear you now.
Hopefully away. So first, thank you, Holly, for inviting me. And I'm coming today from the Qualicum First Nation here at Deep Bay Marine Field Station, where I think a lot of people at Watch have come to some of the events. And it's, a beautiful day, low tide. Looking out the window, seeing all the clam diggers in the sound. It's a beautiful day to be out outside on that low tide. A little bit of today's sort of presentation, it follows in really nicely to Nicole's and Amanda's. When I came to British Columbia in 2018, I thought most of my work would be with the commercial shellfish industry as a sort of shellfish pathologist and geneticist. And then along the way, I was introduced to the Clam Network, and Bryant, who I know is on the call, got me, and Anne Solomon got me out on a clam garden. What a fantastic way to grow shellfish. It's pretty amazing. I've learned a lot. It's really, really exciting. And then I fell in with Watch, and yeah, it's, you know, I've had to learn a whole heap of new skills around marine biotoxins, and so we'll share a little bit of the progress of making a marine biotoxin lab at VIU. So most of my work when I first came here was largely looking at the shellfish industry. There's lots and lots of different kinds of diseases. Amanda was talking, you know, from viruses to bacteria to parasites that cause disease in shellfish, usually when they're stressed. And so I have a sort of, you know, a picture of a set of cages off a shellfish raft. During a mortality event, you can pull up the baskets, and there's 2 baskets in the middle of the cage. One would have its normal stocking density of about 200 oysters. If you throw away the dead, you're left with about 5% remaining. And that can unfortunately happen far too often on shellfish farms. And this event was really caused by a alarming spike in the seawater temperature in July, allowing a Vibrio bacteria to sort of cause an infection. And there's lots and lots of different disease agents in British Columbia. We used to really have a lot of strength, and I think Amanda was referring to Susan Bauer's website, which is getting a little bit old, but it really ranked a lot of the sort of diseases of invertebrates. On the left is Burkitt's. It's a sort of parasite disease that causes infection in a wide range of different shellfish. In the middle is a bacteria that was only discovered very recently called Francisella halietocyta. It causes disease in scallops. It's that sort of little orange discoloration on the abductor muscle. But since Gary discovered this in British Columbia in 2017, they've now become aware that that's one of the big drivers of mussel mortality in other countries. Yet we have no knowledge, does it cause disease in our mussels or other species? And then as I look out at Denman Island, on the right is Denman Island disease, another disease, parasitic disease that causes mortality in shellfish. Most of our disease surveys really only focus on commercial species, and they only focus within a short drive of PBS, the Pacific Biological Station in Nanaimo. Once you start to get further away or into non-commercial species, we really have very, very little knowledge. And so I'm really excited about Amanda's network, because when you do have a disease event, it's really hard to make a diagnosis if you don't know what normal is. You know, if you're doing your histopathology and you're trying to identify a pathogen, if you don't know what's normal or what would normally be causing disease, it's very, very hard to make a diagnosis. So this is where I guess I'm coming in for asking a little bit of a favor. But Bryant reached out as part of their clam restoration projects. Butter clams, they only recruit every few years. They've been working, I think, for the last 14 years on their clam restoration project. They want to accelerate some of the benefits and gains and seeing if they could use the shellfish hatchery we have at Vancouver Island University to do clam enhancement. You know, we have a long tradition of doing salmon enhancement on this coastline, but no marine bivalve enhancement. And we've hit some barriers. We're not, you know, DFO are concerned around introductions and transfers, whether or not we will cause genetic pollution by, you know, moving different genetic stocks around, or the risk of moving diseases. And in both instances, you know, there's really no knowledge. And so we've started a project to look at clam genetics, but also just trying to understand what are the normal sort of parasites and pathogens that you might find in different clam populations. Through, you know, the clam gardens in the Gulf Islands and then the nations and southern Vancouver Island, we have good selection of clams. Same within Discovery Island and VIU, but we're lacking clams from the west coast and northern Vancouver Islands. So if anyone from those regions would be happy to let us come and dig some clams on your beaches, we would be very happy to take you up. We know that everyone's really busy, so we're more than happy to travel and do some collections. So that's sort of on our disease, but also we've been developing a new marine biotoxin laboratory at VIU, and it's really supported by the CFIA. And this comes out of that very first watch meeting that we had at Deep Bay, where Chris Whitehead was talking about how they developed their marine biotoxin laboratory in Sitka. CFIA came out and they reached out to us shortly after that, saying whether or not VIU would be willing to partner with them to set up a laboratory and try to move some of the diagnostic or detection work out of CFIA labs into other labs. And so we now have, almost identical equipment to the CFIA lab. They've been very generous and loaned us a UPLC for doing domoic acid, and we're hoping to seek out some funds for the HPLC for doing the paralytic shellfish poisoning test. CFIA has been doing a number of projects on validating rapid test kits in conjunction with VIU. A lot of work around, can we do PSP processing? So this is taking the shell stock, shucking it at VIU, and then transferring homogenized tissue to CFIA labs for testing. So that's one of the areas where they're struggling is, the time it takes to shuck. And then Chloe, who I think was presented last time we were at Deep Bay, did some work on sea urchin bioaccumulation of PSP. And so she's starting to wrap up that project, and hopefully in the near future, she'll get a chance to talk about that. But one of the things Holly was keen for me to chat is that, VIU really needs a strategic plan. We have projects with CFIA, but we also want to have projects that help all communities. And so, at some point you might be getting a tap on the shoulder. It'd be lovely to plan and make sure that the equipment that we have gets put to the best use, and the sort of questions that people have can be answered. So these are some slides from Hilda and Chloe, and it's looking at a domoic acid rapid test kit. We presented a few months ago on using the Neogen branded rapid test kit. And when we did that presentation, it was sort of rather sad that we'd put all this effort working for several months on this project to only find out that the company had decided to discontinue that product, and we were starting again from scratch. And so this is a kit that's produced by Beacon Analytics. It's an ELISA-based kit. It was really quite straightforward and simple to use. And it so far seems to be working really well. So Chloe and Hilda, they ran samples through at CFIA and got accurate measurements for domoic acid in different tissue samples on the left-hand column. And then in the middle is the Beacon kit and its performance in the laboratory by Chloe at VIU. And you can see it's very, very similar. If anything, it slightly overestimates. And so that's really advantageous. We don't want it to underestimate. We want it to slightly overestimate to make sure it's safe when you're harvesting. To give some further backgrounds, a kit on the website is about $820 Canadian, although I'm sure it could be negotiated cheaper around the $500 mark. It takes about 2 to 3 hours to perform the assay and about $17 per sample. So for small testing, really quite simple, easy, and cost effective. If you're starting to run large numbers of samples, we quickly worked out that it was cheaper to use the UPLC machine. And that was the reason, the generous gift from CFIA. I think that's the conclusion of my presentation. Are there any questions?
I'm just so excited to see that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tim. That's great. So does anybody have any questions for Tim? And I'll open it up for Amanda and Nicole as well. And even Jordan and Jay, who are still here. If you have any questions or comments, or you'd also like to raise some update us on some project that you're working on, that would be great.
Can I ask, I want to raise my hands to everyone for their presentations. And just wondering, you said I know you're recording the meeting, but are people able to get the link to all the PowerPoints? Because so much valuable information was shared.
I can certainly ask around and see for sure, Sequoia.
If it's allowed to be shared, of course.
If no one has any questions for anyone, then I will ask Sequoia to close the workshop for us. And just as always, Jordan and I will stay around for afterwards if you want to have any more discussion around anything, including the idea of creating a tool to work with the Leo observations or similar observations to understand seasonality and co-indicators and how things are changing. That is something we definitely want to keep working on. But I'll ask you please to, Sequoia, if you would close us up today. Thank you.
Yes. Again, I just say Chen Kun Mentomiap. I'm grateful and thankful to all of you for the presentations and your passion and commitment to the work that you do. For most people don't realize all the work that you do on your own and with the community. So I raise my hands to you because it's important work, and it also really validates the traditional indigenous knowledge, and with the programs run, allows for transfer of that knowledge from elders and carekeepers like yourself and in the communities to the young people that get encouraged to be in doing work with all of you. And also, sometimes I think they should listen to these workshops, or get to see it, or have a link to it, because it might also, maybe to elementary kids, be able to think of a way to teach it to young kids in grade 6 and 7 and whatnot, and grade 8 and 9, so that we can maybe catch the bright stars who are good at math and sciences, so that they go on to university and say, I want to be like her, I want to be like him, and know that they have to get the education and go to university and get the training, because they'll have the traditional knowledge, and I call that the theory, but they need the other part. So those are my thoughts that were running through my head, because I'm always looking for bright stars, because I'm an elder in residence at Simon Fraser University Indigenous Student Center, and ask, what are you studying? What are you studying? And, trying to get people to become environmental biologists or biologists, and not too often. Lately, it's been a lot of, there was some people doing sciences so they can become nurses and doctors or research people in the medical, right? So I was like, oh, we need biologists. We need doctors and nurses and researchers, but we also need biologists, as I've said since not to Queen in the long ago for the last 30 years. So Chen Quinman told me, I'm going to do Cecilia's song, Emma Douglas, who was my late grandfather, Dominic Charlie's first wife. And before he married my grandmother, Josephine, Josie. And this was her song that they, Kosalish, she was, this was her song that they fixed to share as medicine for all our people, including those we share it with. And you've probably heard it sung by others. So it's Cecilia's song, and the elders in the 1920s that's during the prohibition against potlatching and sun dancing and blackface dancing, named it the Snowbirds song. And do you know that this year was the first time I found out that there actually is a little snowbird here in BC? And I had never known that and wondered why they called the song Snowbird Song. So now I know why they told us, myself as a young girl, how to hop around to dance. And it was to be like a bird. So Snowbird Song, then a short prayer, and let you get about your day and relax and take care of you. Oh, 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 hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, ah, hey, ah, oh. Oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, ah, hey, ah. Oh, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, ah, hey, ah. Oh, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, ah, hey, ah. Hoichaka. Chen Quinman Tomika Kanak Chesiam Yonsion so Tanoyap and Manman Squalwin to squals to seats, asking you, Creator, to watch over all your children gathered here today and all of their family, all of their friends, all the villages where they're originally from and may still have family there, and all the villages where they live, work, and play now. Asking you put a shield of safety and protection around all of us and our family, friends, and communities, and help us all with our squall and the feelings in our hearts and minds, and our total being, our emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual health and wellness. Prayers for all our family who have serious illnesses, injuries, and all the many illnesses we can't even begin to start naming, and those with anxiety and depression, and especially right now, those with allergies and sinusitis. It's really bad this year because I'm going through that. So prayers for everyone's health, healing, and recovery. Prayers for everyone who of our family and friends or those in community who have traumas with alcohol and drugs, whether prescription or toxic supply, and also for all the homeless who are there because of their traumas and battles and health issues. Let our prayers put a shield of safety and protection around all of them and help them all with their squalwin and their total being, emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual health and wellness, and hoping that our prayers help some find the healing path to wellness and recovery. Hear our prayers for all our family, friends, and communities who may have lost loved ones and have heavy feelings of sorrow in their hearts and minds, that our prayers hold them up as they say farewell and in the healing days afterwards. And always remember the teaching I share from my late grandfather, Dominic Charlie, and my elders, Coast Salish elders, I heard when I was young, attending funerals with him, because I used to help him walk. I say I was his other cane, and I think it was because he wanted me to hear the words. And they said, our loved ones, they have no more physical pain or health issues, no more worries, material worries. The only worry they have is for all their loved ones who have to stay in the land of the living and finish our life journeys. And so they become what I call our spirit guardian warriors, because the old people said they always watch over and protect us from serious injury or loss of life at times, or when we're having a hard day. They send those signs, maybe a shiny coin on the sidewalk or somewhere, or maybe a song on the radio, or a hummingbird, dragonfly, or raven, hawk, eagle, something in the air, on the land or water, that brings us a good feeling in our squalwin, our hearts and minds, and we smile. Spirit guardian warriors. And so they watch over us and are there. And so know you're never alone, and believe in the power of spiritual prayer, because they'll show you the signs that they hear you. So asking you, Creator, let everyone have a wonderful rest of the day, a beautiful evening, and for everyone to have a good weekend, because it's honoring all the warriors, the fathers, and the ones who are the mums who do double duty as mom and father, and all the stepfathers and uncles and brothers, and honoring them, that everyone has a wonderful weekend and celebrating family time. Tama Quitsi Snachum, those are my words. And I just say, from my late son, I always say, he'd say peace and love, top left, because he'd say peace and put his hand over his heart. So everyone, peace and love, top left. And I've added peace of heart and mind, love from my heart to your heart, air hugs. I want some air hugs, people. I need it. I've had a long day, and you have too. Wachayapyo, you all take care.
That's good. Thank you, Sequoia. My
All
cats are all, they came in when you were singing, and they're not leaving. They want to hear you more.
My cats take off because they've been listening since they're little kittens, or 2.5. So they sometimes they'll listen and look at me and then get up and take off. So your cats are, thank you.
They're Yukon cats. They're
Oh.
from Yukon. Anyway, if anybody wants to stick around please feel free to do that. And it was such a wonderful time. Thank you so much for being here and spending time with us and sharing your wisdom. We really appreciate that very much.
See you all. Take care.